welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to teach you how to crochet these flower bookmarks. The great part about this pattern is that it's a no-sew pattern, so when you get to the centers of your flowers, I hot glue them. You could sew them on if you wanted to, but you would see the stitches on the back. So that's partly why I hot glue them, but also I hate sewing things together, so I choose to hot glue it. This pattern can also be adjusted to make any length bookmark if you have a specific book you're making this for. You can use a different size hook, you can use a different weight yarn, so it's really customizable and you can make a bookmark any size that you want. So what you're going to need for this is a yarn for your stem, a yarn for your petals, and then a yarn for the center. You'll also need a crochet hook that corresponds to the weight of yarn you're using. All of these yarns that I'm going to use today are a weight 4 acrylic yarn, so I'm going to use a 5.5mm hook. I could use a smaller hook with this acrylic yarn if I wanted to make a smaller bookmark, but I kind of like having them a little bit bigger. For instance, this gray flower is a little bit bigger than the pink one, purely because of a different size hook. So you can really customize this any way you want it. You'll also need a darning needle to weave in your ends, a pair of scissors, and a hot glue gun if you're going to hot glue the center of the flower. So to make this bookmark, we start by crocheting the leaf, and then we crochet the chain for the stem of the flower, and then we attach the petal color directly to this chain for the stem and create our flower that way. Then we'll create the center of the flower and attach them by your preferred method. So to begin, I'm going to create a slip knot. There are a lot of different ways to do this, but the way I do it is by holding the yarn in front of my hand like this, wrapping it around 2 of my fingers, and then I pull this backside through the middle and then tighten it. Then I'll put this loop on my hook, tighten it to the size of my hook without being too tight, and then you have your slip knot. Next, we are going to chain 8 stitches. Now, in the second chain from our hook, we're going to make 1 single crochet. So here's the first chain from our hook, here's the second. We'll make 1 single crochet. Then we'll make a half double crochet in the next stitch. We'll make 1 double crochet in the next. We'll make 1 treble crochet. And then we'll do the opposite. So we'll start with a double crochet on this side, and then a half double, and then we'll do 3 single crochets in this final stitch. So that is the first half of our leaf. We created 3 single crochets in this very last stitch, so that way we can turn our leaf and start working on this side of the chain. So here's my leaf. Here's where we put the 3 single crochets. Here's our half double crochet, so we're going to put our next half double crochet in this same spot. I also like to keep the tail of the yarn from the first slip knot that we made and kind of crochet over it, so that way there's less that I have to weave in. So there's our half double crochet made on the opposite side of the chain. And then we're going to repeat that. So we have our half double crochet. We're going to put a double crochet across from the double crochet on the first side of the leaf. We'll do a treble crochet, a double crochet, a half double crochet, and then 2 single crochets in the last stitch. Now you have your leaf, and each side should be a mirror image of the other. So we started with a single crochet, a half double, a double, a treble, a double, a half double, 3 single crochets, a half double, a double, a treble, a double, a half double, and then 2 single crochets. Now, this part is kind of optional, but I find that it centers the stem better with the leaf. I slip stitch into this first single crochet. So now my stem is a bit more centered with the leaf. Next, we're going to create a chain that's as long as you want it for your book. So if you're making this for a specific book, you might want to measure how long the book is. So say for example, I'm crocheting a bookmark for this pattern book that I have. I would want to measure how long the spine is, so that way my bookmark can have the flower and the leaf showing when it's closed. Now you can change this if you want. If you don't want the flower and the leaf showing, that's fine. Make your bookmark however long you want it. But ideally, the way this is intended is to kind of look like this. You have the flower and the leaf sticking out of the book. As you can see, they do have a bit of stretch also, depending on the type of yarn that you use. So there's a chance if you don't measure it, your bookmark might fit in your book. If you had a shorter book, I would definitely measure it because this might be a little bit long for smaller books. But again, up to you. If you don't have a book in mind that you're making this bookmark for, then you can kind of follow what I do. So I now chain 35, and that gets me the length of the bookmark, kind of like these ones that I've been showing you. Again, chain however many you want. It doesn't really matter. You can make this as long or as short as you need it to be. Okay, I have completed my chain of 35. So now we're going to attach the color for our petals. This step is a little tricky, so I'll try and go slow and do it a couple of times. So to do this, I take my new petal color, I hold it in my left hand, and I place it over the hook. Now I grab the stem, also with my left hand, and pull the new petal color through the chain. So basically you're just creating a chain of the new color onto your stem. Again, I hold the new color in my left hand, put the yarn over the hook, grab the stem with my left hand, and pull through the new color. Now you can see that the new color chain and the last chain on the stem are a little loose, so I like to just tie these two together to hold them in place. And you can also cut your stem color yarn at this point. So now we have our stem chain, and we've attached the color that we're using for the petals. For the petals, we're going to start by chaining 2, and then in the second chain from hook, this is the first chain, this is the second, we are going to make 5 single crochets. Naturally, as you add more stitches into this first chain, it gets a little bulky and it's kind of easy to turn your work a little bit. In my case, it's going clockwise, so it helps if I turn clockwise a little bit and tuck the stem behind, so that way I can make sure I get all 5 single crochets in this first chain. So we just made a circle, and this is the center point of our flower. And then slip stitch to join into my first single crochet. It can be a little difficult to count the single crochets versus the chain. So you can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and slip stitch into that first single crochet. So now we have a circle. To start the next round, we're going to begin by chaining 1, and then we are going to increase. So we'll be putting 2 single crochets in each of the 5 stitches around. Since we slip stitched into this first single crochet, I skipped that one. So I'm going to skip that and add my first 2 single crochets into the next stitch. And now I'll just go around adding 2 single crochets to the other 4 stitches until we have 10 total. Okay, now I have 10 single crochets, and I'm going to slip stitch into the next stitch right here, and then chain 1. Now we're going to start our petals. So in the next stitch, I'm going to make 1 half double crochet, 2 double crochets, and one more half double crochet. These were all made in the same stitch, so now we have our first petal. Now we're going to slip stitch into the next stitch to secure the petal. And then we'll repeat this until we have 5 petals. So we'll start with a half double crochet, a double crochet, 2 double crochets, a half double crochet, all in the same stitch, and then we slip into the next stitch. Half double, 2 doubles, half double in the same stitch, and then slip into the next stitch. In the next stitch, half double, 2 doubles, half double, and in the next stitch, slip. In the next stitch, half double, 2 double, half double, and then we slip stitch into our final stitch. The final stitch can be a little tough to see, so I'm going to be putting my slip stitch right here. It's a little tough to get into, but I promise you'll be able to do it. So now we have our completed flower, the stem, and the leaf. At this point, I like to chain 1 and then cut my yarn to fasten off. And then I pull the tail of yarn that I just cut through the chain and then pull to tighten. So that way my yarn is secure. Now we're going to make the center of our flower. There are 2 different ways you can start this. I start it with a magic ring, but if you can't make a magic ring because they're quite tricky, you can also begin with a chain 2. So first I'll show you that chain 2 method. Again, we're going to make a slip knot like we did when we started the leaf. And now we'll chain 2, and then you're going to place 5 single crochets in the second chain from hook. Here's the first chain, here's the second chain. You'll put 5 single crochets right here. And then I like to slip stitch into the first single crochet that we made. So now there's a circle. If you're going to make a magic ring, here's how I make a magic ring. I start by holding the yarn in my left hand. I wrap it around 2 of my fingers so I have an X. I will hold that X with my thumb, flip my hand, and wrap the yarn underneath my ring finger. So here's what that looks like. We have the X, and then our yarn secured under the ring finger. I'll take my hook, pass it under this first bar, grab this second bar, and pull it through. Now, I turn my wrist towards me, so that way the yarn twists around the hook. So again, we pulled our yarn through. I turn my wrist towards me. You can move the hook a little bit so your yarn doesn't fall off. And now you have a little twist. You'll take the loop off of your fingers, and here is your magic circle. So we'll put 5 single crochets into this circle. And then pull to tighten. So here's our 5 single crochets tightened in our magic ring, and then we will slip stitch into the first single crochet to close. Now, no matter which way you created these first 5 single crochets, we will chain 1 and then increase. So like we did for the flower petals, I'm going to increase into the second stitch. I skipped this first one that I slip stitched into and start in the second. And so we should have 10 single crochets when we're finished. Okay, I have 10 single crochets, and now I will slip stitch into the next stitch. And then to fasten off and secure, I'll make a chain 1, cut my yarn, and then pull that new tail through and tighten. So now I have the center of my flower. So now we have all of our pieces, and all we really need to do is attach the center of our flower to the flower using your preferred method. I'm going to show you how I hot glue it, and then weave in the end of our leaf right here. I like hot gluing these together because 1, you won't see the stitches when you attach the center of the flower onto the petals, and 2, this is kind of a lot of ends to weave into such a small piece, so I think it's easier to just kind of weave them all to the center, so that way you hot glue them down in the center and they're all secure, and you won't risk weaving these same ends into the same stitches and having your project unravel. That's probably personal preference, but that's just kind of how I like to do it with these. So I'm going to start by weaving these 3 tails through to the center of my flower. It doesn't really matter how you do this. It's not to secure these pieces. So I just try and make it so that I can't really see where I threaded the yarn through, and now I'm in the center. Sometimes you can also kind of pull on the center and pop the ends from the stem through this way. And then you just kind of tug on the stem to get it back down and flush. I also like to tie some of these together just to secure them a little bit more before I glue them. It also makes it easier so then we can trim these ends and we don't have to worry about securing all of this bulk, because then your flower is going to have kind of a hill in the middle. Okay, so now we have these ends secured through the front. You want to make sure you don't pull this too far to where your stem is poking through the front. You want these to be even. And then I'm going to trim these. I'm going to leave a little space from where I made my knots. My knots are down here by my thumb. So I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail and then trim those off. These will be glued down and covered by the center. To weave in the tail on the leaf, since I crocheted over it, it's already running this way through the leaf. So now I'm going to thread it up the opposite direction. Go up a couple stitches. And then I like to go over. I try to thread my tails in 4 different directions, almost like making a box. I find that that keeps them a little tighter and it takes a lot more for them to come loose. So now I'm going to cross over. It can be hard with projects where there's some gaps in your stitches or there's not much stitches to work with to weave in your end. So just kind of do the best that you can. So I already went up, I went over, I went down again, and so now I'm going to complete my box and go over to the left. You don't have to go through too many stitches, especially when you don't have that many to work with. Now I like to tie a knot just to further secure this end. I always get worried about my projects unraveling, so I try to secure them the best that I can. So now we have that knot, and then I just thread the rest of the yarn up a little bit, and I will cut here. So now you can't see the end of it, and even if the end does come undone, there's a knot and then 4 different directions where it would have to go through to unravel. For the center, I take the tail that we used to close the project and weave that through the back into the center. So here's the right side. We're going to go to the back or the wrong side and weave this end into the middle. Make sure you don't pull too tightly or you'll lose your circular shape and you'll get kind of a heart. So I pull it tight and then kind of pull it back out a little bit to maintain my circle. Now I have two ends in the middle, so I tie these a couple times and then I'm going to trim them. When you're tying them, make sure you don't lose your circular shape. You can pull a little bit to bring it back. And now, again, here are my knots down here. I'm going to leave a little bit of a tail. If you want to sew the center of your flower onto the flower, you can either keep that long tail that I just weaved in and cut and use that to sew onto the flower, or you can get a piece of yarn that's the same color as your petals and use that to sew through. Now all we have to do is hot glue these two together. Once your glue gun is heated up, I like to first grab the flower and I kind of pre-glue these ends down that we have. So I'll just put a little dollop of glue in the center and then use the gun to kind of glue down these tails. You can put a little more glue on top if needed to kind of secure them. They are mostly covered, but I just kind of like the extra security of gluing them down a little bit. So now those are secured. I also like to do that to the center. I find it makes attaching these two pieces easier when there aren't a bunch of tails loosely hanging around. Now that those are secure, all we need to do is add some glue to our flower and attach the center piece. I don't put too much glue in the center to begin with because you're going to push down and it's going to expand. And if you put too much, you'll be able to see a lot of the glue on the part of the petal that's showing, so it might seep out up here. So I always start with a smaller amount, and then if it's not fully stuck, you can kind of peel the center part back, add a little bit of glue, and secure it down. Make sure that you secure the back side of the center to the flower. Sometimes the glue can seep through the back, so be careful with your fingers. Try not to burn yourself. I've done it quite a few times. Never feels good. But now I'm just kind of pressing it in place. And so now you can see it's attached. If you peel back the petals in the center a little bit, you can see that it could be attached a little bit better. So now I go in and add a little bit of glue and push down to fully secure the center piece. That way I can control more of it and I don't end up with a bunch of hot glue seeping out because I put too much down at the beginning. Once you're satisfied with how secure the center is, there might be some little hot glue stringy bits that you'll want to peel off. So you can go around, do that. I always like to kind of tug on the petals a little bit as well, so that way they're really showing and not covered up by the center. There have been a couple that I have made where the yarns are a little bit of a different size, so if you make the center with a larger yarn than you made the petals with, the center might kind of dwarf the petals. Additionally, if you make the center with a yarn weight that's smaller, or you use a smaller hook, you'll end up with a smaller circle, and you might have some of the gaps around the center of the flower showing. So that's one reason why I like to make sure I use the same weight yarn for the flower and the center. So that way some of these gappy bits that you just naturally end up with are covered. And just like that, your flower bookmark is finished. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments and I will be happy to help you out. Thanks for watching and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.